This is my first time talking in Israel at a conference, so I'm very glad to be here and talking about an aspect of my doctoral research. To give a bit of context, my doctoral research looks at 5 family collections. Today I'll be talking just on one of them, the Lamberg family. If we have time, we'll end on some methodological considerations. If we don't, then we can have that in the questions afterwards, perhaps. Firstly, to go through where the title actually comes from. Our lives are practically living together almost physically. It's taken from a letter from Anna Hamburg to her son Karl. Now, Anna Hamburg was in Aachen at this point in time, and her son Karl had been interned in Canada. You can see the quote on the board where he writes, "Naturally, I feel like you concerning the last 2 years. Our lives are practically living together almost physically, but even though one's fate is putting our patience to the test still longer. But I'm not giving up hope just yet, even though the very black clouds are appearing on the horizon." There's lots to kind of analyse in this quote. I thought I'd show you where it comes from first, and then we'll come back to it when we reach this point in the story. So to give a bit of context to who these people are, when we're talking about, not where we're talking about. Anna Charlotte Philip was born in 1886. In 1911, she married Richard Lamberg, who was a electrical engineer, and they moved to the USA. They didn't stay there that long, partly because Anna didn't like it that much. On the birth of their first daughter, Anna travelled back to Germany, had her daughter there, and then they went back to the USA. On the start of the First World War in 1914, the 3 of them moved back to Anna's parents' house in Aachen. They later went on to have 3 more children, Margaret, Mary Louise and Karl, and each of these children all managed to come to Britain at various points in the 1930s. As you can see, that Richard Lamberg died in 1928, leaving Anna a widow and the sole carer of the 4 children. I put other people on here who are relevant to the story in some way. Mainly the one that we need to take note of is the fella on the far right, Emil Lamberg, who was a cousin of Richard Lamberg and who lived in the USA as a ophthalmologist, I believe. So, as I said, various members of the family managed to escape at different points in time. But Anna, who had converted to Christianity whilst in the USA, didn't believe that she needed to leave. She was convinced that the Christian faith would save her. Nevertheless, when it became clear in 1938 that they needed to leave, the efforts were made for the children to escape first. They made it in a various number of different ways. So now we've had some context. I thought it would be quite interesting to kind of highlight, as I said, the researcher's journey and how one comes to find private collections in the first place. I didn't know the Lamberg family prior to start researching them, so how do we actually get to find these sort of private collections, therefore what can we gain from them? About 2 or 3 years ago, I started researching Mr. Emmanuel, which is a book published in 1938 by Louis Golding. And it's a story about a man who travels to Germany in 1935 in search of a young refugee boy's mother. Now, the interesting part about Mr. Emmanuel is partly that it was turned into a film, and then that became the first kind of British film to highlight Nazi persecution on screen, but also that all of the characters are based off of real people. So I started to trace who these people were and went on from there. Now, one of the characters was Bruno Rosenheim. It's based on a young boy called Caspar David Negler. There's various things that have been written about Caspar. One thing that I came to realise that I couldn't find anywhere was his diary. It had been quoted in various places, but I didn't know where it was. In one footnote, I found out that it was meant to be with a man called Karl Helmut Amberg, the same Amberg that I've just been talking about. So I contacted their family through various means. They didn't have the diary, but what they did say was that Karl himself had quite a vast collection of letters. So I thought, well, I'll park the kind of Mr. Emanuel research for a point in time, and then move on to study the letters of Karl Amberg. Now, Karl, as it turned out, had transcribed and translated all of the letters that he had. He had also collated letters that other various family members had at the same time. He then put these two together in three booklets in 2001. Where the originals of these letters are at this point in time, I don't know. So all of the things I'm using today, all of the extracts, all of the quotes, are the translated versions and transcribed versions that Karl has done. Now, obviously I am very aware that this kind of limits the stuff that we can do with them specifically, but also I have to trust in Karl as the person that wrote many of these letters. However, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I managed to track down some of the original ones that are held in this country through the lady that gave me the booklets. So hopefully we'll expand upon these a bit more. For context, this is Caspar David Negler, and there's quite a nice extract which Karl wrote about his friend Caspar, which I then use in other things. So I guess I thought I'd show you that for context. So Anna has remained in Aachen. The four children have gone to Britain. So I thought I'd have a quick discussion about German Jewish space at this point in time and how this relates to the kind of movement to this kind of new epistolary space, which my title refers to. There are various different types of Jewish spaces in Germany at this point in time. You have physical spaces, the synagogue, the home, the cemeteries, but also metaphysical spaces, the space found through prayer, through other types of religious gathering. In 1933, we see the production of Nazi space, these kind of areas, these ideologies, these thoughts that Jewish people are no longer able to access. This creation of a Volksgemeinschaft to the exclusion of the Jewish community. And then Confino also talks about a space without Jews prior to a world without Jews in reference to his title of his book. So what we do see in this period is then a retreat into the home. The home space, a retreat to the Jewish community itself, but also, as I said, the actual physical place becomes a lot more important. When the family itself begins to become fractured, split, the only method of maintaining this connection is through letters. The correspondence becomes enforced, but in reference to Hannah Hortschneider's paper tomorrow, where she talks about enforced correspondence. So we see a retreat to paper. Now, various people have talked about this in terms of diary writing, this retreat into the self, but we also see it in terms of letters and this new epistolary space. how do we conceptualize this space? What's in it? Is it specific to the people that write it? How do we begin to understand this metaphysical notion that doesn't exist, but for the people, the correspondence is very real, is very tangible, both in terms of the physical letter itself, who is writing it, and what it actually represents. For Anna Lamberg, the place in which she was existing at this time was also very important to her, not just the correspondence that she was talking about. Anna lived in Salier Alley. The house is there still. Her Stolperstein is outside it. And in a letter to her husband's cousin Emil in 1939, she talks about the effort of dissolving a household. Now, this was in reference to when Anna believes that she was going to have to leave herself, and she kind of laments the loss of the space in which she's living. She says it's very hard for me to dispose of anything. When I sit here as I do in the open country, on the terrace, all green around me, grass and forest in view, then I can't imagine that soon all this will disappear from my orbit. Now she talks about this in both a physical sense, but also a kind of metaphysical sense, that this is the space of her family, right? This is where her family existed, should I say. She then goes on to mention the children and gives long issues of what's happening to them, how are they doing, all through Emil Lamberg. So this quote kind of starts to highlight this blurring between how Anna considers the place in which she's in and the importance of the letters that she sees. You can't really see the picture there because it's a bit dark, but this is Emil Lamberg. So Anna writes to Emil in America. Emil then writes to the children in Britain. You couldn't correspond directly between Germany and Britain from 1939 onwards. And until 1941, you could do that through the USA prior to them entering the war. So in this case, Emil acts as an intermediary and often as a mediator to the correspondence. Now, as this quote on the board shows, Emil was warned of not forwarding letters directly. So it wasn't a case of him receiving a letter, putting it in a new envelope and then sending it on. That was also not allowed. If he was thought to be doing that, the children in Britain would be viewed as I said, like communicating with the enemy. For the time being, their mother ranks as an enemy, poor soul. But what Emil did do is he wrote various in various ways about the children's lives and also about Anna's lives. Now, in terms of the kind of methodological issues here, we see that we have the letters written by Emil in various ways, but obviously none of those sent to Anna backwards. So Anna did not survive, so therefore none of the letters that we have addressed to her exist in this way. However, Karl in 1940 is interned. Britain during the war decided to inter all of its enemy aliens, first those around the coast. Karl Lamberg at the time was in school in Winchester, which is slightly in from the coast, but it encompassed the kind of southern region. I actually found out about a week ago that the place that he was interned in first was currently where my university is. It's the same building that he was actually interned in, which is a chance more than anything. He is interned on the Isle of Man, and then he is sent to Canada, which is where he also meets Casper Nagler, the guy that I talked about at the start. Now, in Canada, as it says on the board, they were treated as prisoners of war, not as internees. As a result, Karl was able to write directly to his mother in Aachen, which he hadn't previously been able to do while he was in England. And here he explains that it was easy to send things from the camp. Later, when they were officially declared refugees, they couldn't write in this way anymore. So it was the change in which they were categorised that led to the lack of correspondence afterwards. And then he says from there that he sent several Red Cross messages, which seemed to take 6 to 7 months from here. Previously, it was a lot faster. So actually, we have letters sent directly from Canada to Germany in that way. These letters that Anna writes to Karl, obviously we don't have the ones that Karl wrote to Anna, as I said. These ones that Anna wrote to Karl, inherently emotional correspondences, right? That she talks about numerously shedding tears, reading them, but also this idea of reading and rereading, right? That she reads it once and again and again and again, almost in an attempt to reduce the time to the next letter, right? That she's waiting until the next one comes, so rereads it again over and over. And each one of the letters that Anna wrote to Karl expressed this idea, this reading and rereading. She says that she's hearing about him in other ways, one through a distant cousin of theirs, Wilhelm Schaffenberg, and also Emil, as we said. But she says the personal touch is so different. Now this also refers to the idea of receiving a direct letter as opposed to a mediated one, seeing his own words as opposed to the words of Emil, as we said, but also the physical aspect of holding something that has travelled. This kind of materiality of the letter, which hasn't yet been mentioned in this workshop, but the not just the words themselves, but the notion of holding something that's touched someone else's hands and also has done something that they cannot, i.e. travelled a distance that for the people that are writing is insurmountable. The letter that we have right from the very start. These letters allowed Anna to feel like they were almost physically together, something that she didn't perhaps feel when the letters were mediated. This new epistolary space between them is a different one from which she previously experienced with other members of the family because it is a direct communication. But there's also this part at the end where the very black clouds are appearing on the horizon. Anna is acutely aware that things are changing in 1941. Does she mention this explicitly in any of the letters? No. Partly because you wouldn't be allowed to, it would be a lot difficult to get it passed through, but also she doesn't want to worry her son, Karl, in too many ways. In other letters that Karl sent to other members of his family, it is also apparently aware that he knows what's happening. He can see that by this point in time she's been forced to change house, for example, and he knew that she would never leave the previous home which she talked about previously because she loved it so much. So Karl knows that some things are going on anyway. I don't usually show all of this letter, and I haven't because I think it's too personal. Which is also another kind of thing that we can perhaps talk about, the kind of ethics of using these such personal correspondences. This was a letter that was written in 1948 by a friend of Anna to the children explaining what happened to her. I haven't included all of it, just the parts that perhaps tell the story in a bit more detail. It talks of having to surrender her home to the Gestapo, but that she must pick the violets from the garden, and then living in the Judenhauser. And And then it goes on to talk about more specifics about her deportation and other things, but I don't like to necessarily quote that because I think that's within my trust to the family itself. Just to end on, because I've got about 2 minutes left to talk, and then we'll move into some questions if you have any. Some of the issues with using these letters, beyond, as I've said, the ethical that we just talked about, are the silences that we encompass in the correspondence. Now, I asked in the previous talk about how these letters came to exist, right? Silences appear in the creation of the source itself and also in the creation of the archive. Letters that I do have, letters that I don't have. Letters that have been translated, letters that haven't yet been found. This collection is actually more complete than other ones that I use because Karl Lamberg went to the effort of collecting all of these sometime during the 1980s. But as I said, the creation of the source, things that aren't mentioned. Anna Lamberg very rarely mentions anything about the persecution that she was experiencing at the time, but also issues of censorship, more acutely issues of selfless censorship. You didn't need to be censored. You knew that censorship was going to happen, and didn't say it in the first place. That being said, there are letters that I have one that was meant to be sent to Anna, which wasn't sent. Therefore, we have that because Emil marked on it not being sent due to a censor. So ones like that, and also this idea of the epistolarium. That's something that Liz Stanley notes about, this idea of a hypothetical entire output of someone's letter writing ability. We don't have all of these. We never will have all of these. I suppose the question from that is, do we want all of these, and do we need all of these? Do we need every single letter that someone has ever sent to get a picture of this idea? You need to read letters in a sequence to get a sense of what's happening and how we understand this person. But if you have every single letter in an entire network, when does it stop? How do we conceptualize one story, and do we need perhaps all of it? Do we need the train tickets that we're sent in little things like this, or these scraps of paper? I think in some ways we do, but also in other ways, on a practical sense, it's also not possible in many ways to use such a personal archive like this of such depth. And one final one, this notion of the shared world that Janet Altman talks about, that references on the map of someone's shared existence are particular to the shared world of the writer and the addressee. There are some references that I will never know, partly because they are specific to the people, but they are also specific to the time frame. In this sense, because the letters have been transcribed by Karl Lamberg previously, he's managed to fill in a lot of the stuff that he knew anyway. With archival collections, where there are no family to talk about, the reference points are often lost. If you call someone a nickname, if you refer to them by a single initial, all of these things encounter and provide us with issues in how to access such correspondences. And perhaps this shows a difference between the way in which we can use private collections versus we use public archives, right? If something's in an archive, it's often very difficult to contact the family that's surrounding it, or at least it provides that other step. In terms of private collections such as these, we have the family to ask, who may be able to perhaps enlighten us on this point. This is Karl Hamburg. He's also alive still, age 99, and also Anne Reynolds, who is the lady that gave the papers to me. Where do these go from here? I think they remain in the family, along with all of the pictures, but I've been quite lucky to be able to read them and to hopefully to expand upon our knowledge of the correspondence at this time. Thank you very much.
Two questions. The first is more observation. I was able to publish last year a book about Maurice Samuel, a British Manchester-born author, friend of Lewis Golding, by the way. Right. I saw some of their correspondence in Cincinnati. So they have living grandchildren. He has living grandchildren. So I was able to ask them directly, what do you feel comfortable and what do you not feel comfortable with? And you're quite right. I think that's a very, very special thing when you have a family that you can talk to and ask. But my question, I guess more of an observation, my question is, I'd like to hear a little bit more about how this fits into your overall project.
So I have 5 collections. 3 of them are private collections, 2 of them are archival collections. Not necessarily by choice, but that's how it turned out. I found the collections, translated them, not myself because that's far beyond my capabilities to translate that many things. And then the questions emerged from the collections as opposed to the other way around. I didn't go in trying to find what was in correspondence. I guess looked at the correspondence first and then started to decide from that point onwards. My project more broadly looks at this kind of epistolary space and how it worked, how we understand it, how families felt about this correspondence, the importance of the letters to the people then and to us now. Partially a kind of methodological look into the letter and how the historian can use it, but as I said, also how the people at the time understood, and is there a disparity between those? Also, what these letters contained, what was in them, discussions on immigration, the inherent emotional dialogues of the correspondence themselves, and also early knowledge of the Holocaust. Right? What can be said at this point in time? Can things be said at this time? How do they talk about it? How do they understand the persecution through the context of what they know, reading through newspapers, through the grapevine, versus what's being said in the letter? So I have other letters where Carl talks about hearing things on the radio or talking through other people in the internment camp. How does that impact upon the way that he reads the letters from his mother? So broadly a look into the letters of German Jewish families in this time period through the lens of 5 specifically. And 5 wasn't a number which I had set, it was just what happened to be, and then go from there.
Thank you.
Yes.
You raised a lot of interesting points. I mean, I'm not so interested in letters per se as a genre, but I think historically and also for genealogy there's a lot of value in all this. Obviously, it deals with the Holocaust, it deals with migration, it deals with people in crisis. But what was surprising, you talked about the English censorship, which I never thought of. And it's even more interesting that the English shipped out the prisoners of war to the colonies, but the colony is not in Australia, for example, it's in Canada, and we don't usually think of Canada in that respect. So you opened up a lot of things, and I was just wondering, maybe some of the colleagues will have some idea. The British in Palestine, now, the German Jews were like the second biggest group here in the 30s. I never heard about the British here, how would you say, being concerned about the German Jews and German spies within. In illegal immigration, that's a topic, but the question is here, how did the British relate to all these German Jews? Because essentially, they're now legal, but they're also the enemy.
Yes.
You had a lot of, so yeah, the question is, how did the British relate to the Jews here in the 30s as the German Jews as the enemy?
In short, I don't know here. In short, I don't. I know there's a lot of research on German Jewish migration to Palestine during this period, but as to the As to the attitudes of censorship, I don't know. In the case of Canada, there was only a few thousand that went to Canada in this time. Some went to Australia, the Maldives, other places around Shanghai, for example. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the same sort of concerns in other places. But I don't know. I don't know if anyone else has any.
If I may,
Yeah.
a lot of those Canadians, POWs from German origin, quite a few of them stayed in Canada. And, you know, it was obviously not a kind of a super hostile environment, because many of them stayed and remained. Probably most famously, Emil Lamberg, who became a professor of philosophy at University of Toronto, but was in a POW camp.
To full context with those, Karl Hamburg became a professor of chemistry. Caspar Nagler became a professor of sociology. There's a great book by Eric Koch called Deemed Suspect, where he basically lists all of the people that went there and what happened to them.
It's very interesting, but I want to ask an historical question. Do we see from the letters anything relating to the fact that Jews are incarcerated in a POW camp with German and Nazi soldiers?
Yes. I didn't have time to put it in here, but Karl, in 1940, in December 1940, Karl pens what he terms a little story, where he talks about himself in the third person, and it's about like a 8 or 9 page thing. It's quite extensive. Then sends it back to his family to kind of narrate his own story before we start to narrate it now. And in it he talks about being interned in Canada with Nazis. And he talked about other people that he knew from Winchester and from the camps in Britain that didn't go there, didn't have the same experience. So yes, there is. Off the top of my head, I can't quote it, but he does talk about it, yeah. And also in the letters of Caspar Nagler, which I also have from another archive, he also talks about it. And it's quite interesting to see, because they were on the ship at the same time, see how they talk about it and what they choose at that time. So yeah, it is there, and it's an interesting aspect of it.